enter with humility, ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for forgiveness, and after asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for forgiveness, then you can enter the city. And وَسَنَزِيدُ الْمُحْسِنِينَ will increase for those people who do ihsan. Ihsan is, this is also an Islamic concept. The best way to understand ihsan Islamically is there's a hadith where تَعْبُدُ اللَّهَ كَأَنَّكَ تَرَاهُ فَإِنْ لَمْ تَكُنْ تَرَاهُ فَإِنَّهُ يَرَاكَ. That you worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as if you can see Him, because even though you can't see Him, He can see you. So ihsan is to do something the best way possible, right? As if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is watching. So if they do that, they'll get reward. Now this we start from verse 59, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَبَدَّلَ الَّذِينَ ظَلَمُوا قَوْلًا غَيْرَ الَّذِي قِيلَ لَهُمْ فَأَنزَلْنَا عَلَى الَّذِينَ ظَلَمُوا رِجْزًا مِنَ السَّمَاءِ بِمَا كَانُوا يَفْسُقُونَ. But the evildoers changed the words they were commanded to say. So we sent down a punishment from the heavens upon them for their rebellious nature, their rebelliousness. So they were ordered to enter with humility. That's the first thing that they changed. That they, instead of entering with humility and bowing their heads, they observed an unusual posture. Right? So they entered into the city with a strange posture. That's the first thing that they changed. And they also changed not just the words, right, wordplay, but also the meaning, right, in such a way where it was such a gross distortion. It was like a mockery of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's, Allah's command. So one narration mentioned that they started saying "habbatun fi sha'ri," right, that grains in the midst of barley, or hibba, which is more popular or more widely accepted. Instead of saying hibba wa they started adding a noon, hibba, which means wheat. So instead of saying, Allah forgive us, and asking for forgiveness from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they started to say wheat, right? Just as a mockery from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's words. So as a result, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent down a punishment in the form of a plague. And this plague came and wiped out a big portion of them. And there's a hadith which mentions that a plague is a punishment for the disobedient, but a blessing for the obedient. Right? That's how plagues are generally viewed in Islam. So, going back to their changing of the words, this also is very relevant to us in terms of our, Islam and our Quran and Sunnah. And Imam Qurtubi, he explains it in great detail in his Tafsir Qurtubi. And he mentioned that the speech, there are two types. Islamically, there are two types of speech. One, where the words, the exact words, are the objective and the meaning itself. So it's not just the word, but the words and the meaning. They're the objective, the main thing. And in that situation, of course, the ruling is different. And then there are other situations where the words aren't the main objective, but it's actually the meaning. So as long as the meaning is conveyed, even if you don't use the exact words, there's no sin upon the person. So some example that he gives, number one is the adhan. Right? The adhan that we give. The adhan is not just the meaning of the adhan, calling to prayer, but it's also the words. So the exact words of the adhan cannot be changed, right? Because the words are also the main objective, and by giving the adhan in a way where you're changing the words, you're committing an act of sin. So giving adhan by changing the words, this is not allowed Islamically. The adhan must be given with the exact words that the Prophet taught us or that we have been taught through the hadith. So the adhan is one example where the words have to be exact as well as the meaning. Another example is prayer, salah. Right? The salah is one where it's not just the meaning of the words of the prayer, but also the exact words, which is where the other discussion of can you pray in a different language comes up, and there's different back and forth, but essentially when it comes down to it, the fuqaha agree that you have to use the exact words, the Arabic words in the prayer. You can't change it up with different words. If it is a Muslim, he doesn't have to he can use certain phrases until he's able to learn it, but you still have to use the words of the salah. So even in the salah, for example, you have to use the exact words as well as the meaning. So you can't distort, you can't change anything whatsoever. So now the issue comes down with the Quran and the Hadith. What about, what is the ruling with the Quran? What is the ruling with the Hadith? The Quran follows the same ruling. It's not just the meaning of the Quran, but it's also the words, because this is the kalam of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. These are the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And because it is kalam of Allah, the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the words are the, you can't change the words around. This does not include the qira'at, the different narrations of how the qira'at that are there. Those are from the Prophet ﷺ, narrated with a sound, is a chain of narration. So this is excluding that. If a person were to just bring an Arabic text of the Quran, but change the words with similar meaning, you're not allowed to do that. That's not the Quran. You will not be reading the Quran. You will not be getting the reward of reading the Quran either, because the words are changed. So by reading Arabic words that substitute certain, meaning, certain words, but may have a similar meaning rather, that's something that's not wrong. Right? So for the Quran, the exact words must be used as well as the meaning, with the exception of the Quran. Now comes, and this is the reason why with the Bani Israel, it was the same ruling. For them, it wasn't just a meaning, they had to use that specific word. That was what they were commanded by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they distorted not just the word, but also the meaning, and making it a complete mockery. Now when it comes to the hadith, there are two different views. On one hand, you have, and this Imam we also mentioned in his tafsir, where we have Imam Bukhari, Imam Malik, and Imam Shafi'i also. These three ayman are the view that it is permissible when you are narrating a hadith, that if you are provided that you're not directly quoting the Prophet ﷺ. If you are directly quoting the Prophet ﷺ, then you have to use the exact words. If you're not directly quoting, then you are allowed to give the gist. And as long as you don't distort the meaning, but there's also conditions to this as well. And that is that the person who is conveying the message has a sound understanding of the hadith itself. So they know the hadith itself, they also have an understanding of the Arabic language and the background of the hadith as well. So you have to really know the hadith properly, and then you can convey the message of the hadith, then that's perfectly fine, that's okay, as long as you're not directly quoting the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But there are, on the other hand, you have other ai who say no, you have to also, with the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, also use exact words. They use it as an example. Once the Prophet ﷺ taught a man a dua for sleeping, right? And the dua part of it, there are many duas for sleeping, but one of them is آمنت بكتابك الذي أنزلت ونبيك الذي أرسلت. Right? I believe in the book that you have sent and the Prophet that you have sent over. So the Prophet ﷺ taught these words. آمنت بكتابك الذي أنزلت ونبيك الذي أرسلت. This man, what he did was he changed, instead of Nabiyyaka Nabi, he said Rasulka Nabi. So although Rasul and Nabi are both referring to the Prophet ﷺ, a Rasul is a messenger that is, generally speaking, a messenger that has been given a new book and a new Sharia. And a Nabi is one that follows the previous scriptures. A Rasul can also be referred to as a Nabi as well. Right? So he, and without any, blame on the companion, he changed and said, "Nabiyyaka alladhi arsalta wa rasulaka alladhi arsalta." The Prophet ﷺ heard about this, and he asked the man not to do that. And he asked the man to specifically use "Nabiyyaka alladhi," not "Rasulaka alladhi." Right? And there are many reasons for this, because although a Rasul is a messenger, but a Rasul can also be referred to as an angel, can also be Rasul, like can also be referred to one as a messenger. But a Nabi is a specifically only those who have been given wahi from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, revelation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So there are many reasons why the ulama give this reason. But going back to the hadith, the Prophet also corrected that companion to use the exact words. So that's one. They use Also, there's a hadith of the Prophet sallallahu there's something which he mentions, نَذَرَ اللَّهُ إِمْرَأَ سَمِعَ مَقَالَتِي فَبَلَّغَهَا كَمَا سَمِعَ. That may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, flourish or enable to flourish that person who hears my speech and conveys it exactly as he has heard it. So, taking these two hadiths and many others as well, some scholars of the opinion that you have to use the exact words as well, even that way. Now, although there are scholars of that opinion, the majority of the scholars and the jurists are of the opinion that hadith, however, can be used as long as you're conveying the main gist of the meaning and you're not distorting the meaning. Because if you're distorting the meaning, then that's completely haram according to everybody. When you quote a hadith and just to justify something that you want to do, you start distorting the meaning of the words to make something that may be haram into halal, or something maybe, something that is questionable into halal, or just something that's haram into something questionable. To distort the meaning of hadith in that way is completely forbidden, completely haram, and this is something that as Muslims is unanimously all scholars agree that it's not allowed. But if you give the gist of the meaning as correctly as possible, then that is something that is okay, and that is something that is allowed. So that just kind of summarizes it in terms of our Sharia, what the Bani Israel did, why they were held accountable, and according to us, where our adhan, our Quran, our prayers, where these things stand, what we are allowed to and what we are not allowed to convey in terms of just this meaning. So just as a recap, our prayers, adhan, the Quran itself, anything that is taught specifically as a mode of worship, we have to use the exact words as well. But when it comes to hadith in terms of meaning and education, we're allowed to use in terms of just to convey the meaning, as long as we're not distorting the meaning from its original text or original translation. Then move on to verse number 16. Here, and this not goes back to the point where we talked about how the Bani Israel as a punishment were made to wander the little area, 10-mile radius area, and they were wandering for 40 years. So eventually they became thirsty. So this verse of Allah subhanahu goes back to that part. وَيَسْتَسْقَى مُوسَى لِقَوْمِهِ فَقُلْ نَضْرِبْ بِعَصَاكَ الْحَجَرَ فَانْفَجَرَتْ مِنْهُ اثْنَتَا عَشْرَةَ عَيْنًا قَدْ عَلِمَ كُلُّ أُنَاسٍ مَشْرَبَهُمْ كُلُوا وَاشْرَبُوا مِنْ رِزْقِ اللَّهِ وَلَا تَعْثُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ مُفْسِدِينَ. And when Musa alayhi sought water for his people, we said, strike the rock with your staff. So 12 springs gushed forth from it. Each group of them came to know their drinking place. Eat and drink of what Allah has provided, and do not go about the earth spreading mischief or disorder. So the Bani Israel, obviously they were wandering, they became thirsty, so they wanted water. They requested Musa alayhi to provide them water. Of course, again, remember this is in punishment. Still, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commanded Musa alayhi to strike the rock. Now, with the children of Yaqub alayhi, he had 12 sons. And each of the sons had a sizable family. So this is where the 12 tribes came from. And each of the tribes had their own administrative head as well. So they're very organized tribes. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, His mercy, He could have just gave one, and they could have had, they had to stand in line for water. But out of His mercy, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made 12 springs gush, so that each of the tribes can have their own drinking place. So as He struck this, the rock, the water gushed forth. First thing, there are many people who may object to this, people who don't understand what the qudra of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is. Even, from a natural standpoint, this is not something that is abnormal or unusual. This is something that can happen. And we see, rocks doing many different things. Water is one thing that you can get from water. You can get from rocks as well. And also, it's a misunderstanding what is impossible, right? Something that is impossible. When people don't understand this, they just kind of go, "Oh, this is something that's impossible." But really, when you think about it, it's not really that impossible. But going back to Musa alayhi praying to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah gave him water. While this is something that Musa alayhi practiced, this is also a practice in our ummah, in our Sharia as well. When we are in need of water, there's not enough rainfall. The Prophet on one occasion, he went to an open plain and he gave a khutbah and he prayed and he made dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave him rain. In another hadith, another instance, this is during Jummah, during the Friday khutbah, where they requested the Prophet to pray for rain. He prayed for rain and the rain came. And so this is something that we do in our Sharia as well. The commonality between the two is that tawbah has to be part of it. Seeking forgiveness from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when we pray for rain, we have to first seek forgiveness from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for our sins, and then from there we can ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala what we want. And this is generally with dua itself. Generally, when you're making dua for yourself, that's how you dua should be. That you first praise Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you send salawat on the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, then first you ask for forgiveness. You ask for forgiveness first. You ask Allah, please forgive me of my sins, sins that you may know, that you don't know about, big or small. So you ask, Allah subhanahu for forgiveness first, and then whatever it is you need, then you ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So just generally speaking, when we do make our dua, it should have that format. But here in the Salat al-Istisqa, or the rain prayers, we also do the same thing. We first have to seek forgiveness from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for rain. And inshallah we'll leave it here for this week. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala enable us to observe the commandments of Sharia the best way possible with ihsan, and may Allah protect us from changing or distorting things otherwise.
Thank you.